Hello everyone! So it's time for more of the Robber Hotzenplotz. This time it's the end of Petrozilius Zuckerman. The great magician Petrozilius Zuckerman put on his nighttime spectacles so as to see better in the dark. Then he hurried up to the castle turret, mounted his magic robe and took off. He flew all over the countryside, keeping a sharp lookout, but all in vain. He could find no trace of Casper. Meanwhile, the moon had risen over the open heath. The fairy weed immediately began to gleam with a silvery light among the roots of the old pine tree. Quickly, Casper picked a bunch of the flowers. Now, Petrozilius Zuckerman couldn't see him, even with his special nighttime spectacles on. Casper set off to walk back, holding the fairy weed in his pocket with his right hand. Twice, 3 times, Zuckerman flew by overhead on his magic robe. Casper hunched his shoulders and ducked his head. Even if he had not ducked, Zuckerman couldn't have seen him, although the magician was flying so low that Casper felt the rush of the air as he passed. The fairy weed made him invisible, but that was not all. Now that the herb was in his pocket, Casper didn't feel tired any longer. His legs seemed to be walking of their own accord. In the faint light of dawn, he reached the castle safe and sound. The gate was shut. Casper touched it with the fairy weed, and it opened to let him in. At that very moment, he heard a tremendous rushing sound in the air above him. Looking up, he saw that Zuckerman had just landed on the castle turret. He hoped that Zuckerman had not noticed anything peculiar. But the wicked magician Petrozilius Zuckerman had noticed something. A few minutes ago, the gate of his castle had opened and shut all by itself. "Ho-ho!" he exclaimed. "Goblins and hobgoblins, what's all this? Someone I can't see has come into my castle, but who and how the devil did he do that?" Petrozilius Zuckerman snapped his fingers for his magic wand. "Whoever it is," he cried in a fury, "I'll find him. I'll punish him for his impertinence. Thunder and lightning, sulphur and brimstone, I'll punish him horribly." The great magician ran down the spiral staircase to the ground floor, 3 steps at a time. By this time, Casper was on his way to the cellar. He was running down a dark passage towards the toad's pool. He had no lantern this time, but he didn't need one. With the fairy weed in his hand, he could see in the dark like a cat. The first door, then the second door, and now the third. "Here I am," he cried. "I've got it. Tell me what to do." "Give me your hand and help me out." Casper lay flat on the floor and stretched out the hand holding the fairy weed to the toad in the pool. "No, the other one," croaked the toad. "You must help me out of the water fast." Casper could hear a loud, angry voice just outside the cellar. Petrozilius Zuckerman had noticed the cellar door was open, and a terrible suspicion flashed into his mind. Cursing and raging, he clattered down the steps. It would only be a matter of minutes before he reached them. "Quick!" cried the toad. Casper seized her with his left hand and put down on the floor beside him. Zuckerman was coming nearer and nearer. The cellar echoed with his shouts and screams of fury. "Quick!" said the toad again. "Touch me with the fairy weed." Casper obeyed. At that moment, the wicked magician Petrozilius Zuckerman stormed through the last door. But all of a sudden, he stopped dead in his tracks. And when great magicians stop dead in their tracks, their time is almost up. Casper was frightened too, but not at the sight of the wicked magician. He was startled by the light that flooded the cellar. It was a blinding light. Casper had to close his eyes. When he opened them again, he saw a beautiful lady standing beside him. She shone like the sun. Everything about her was so beautiful that Casper could hardly take it all in. Her face, her hands, her hair, and her long golden dress. "Oh," thought Casper, "I'll be dazzled if I look any longer." Should he look away? But he couldn't look away either, so he prudently closed one eye and looked at the fairy out of the other. Petrozilius Zuckerman was standing by the cellar wall as if he had been struck by lightning. His face was white as chalk, his knees were knocking, large beads of perspiration ran down his face. He tried to speak, but he had lost his voice. He was so dazed that the magic wand slipped from his hand. The wand fell to the ground. The fairy Amaryllis touched it lightly with the toe of her shoe. It rolled over and over and fell into the pool with a splash. At last, Petrozilia Zuckerman plucked up his courage. "Curses!" he screamed. He jumped forward to save the magic wand. Too late. His fingers grabbed the empty air. He lost his footing, overbalanced, and before Caspar and the fairy Amaryllis could help him, he plunged deep into the water. There was a last terrible scream. Then he was swallowed up, gurgling and burbling. The deep water of the Toad's pool closed over the wicked magician, Petrozilia Zuckerman. A Fairy Lady. Seppel had been peeling potatoes half the night. It was very difficult to keep awake, but he was too frightened of the great magician Zuckerman to go to sleep. Not until the last potato was peeled and cut up did he slump forward on the kitchen stool, when he fell asleep on the spot. Seppel slept with his head resting on the edge of the table. In his dreams he was still at work. There was a great mountain of potatoes in front of him. He went on and on peeling them, but he never came to the end. The mountain never looked any smaller. In fact, it was growing bigger and broader. At last Petrozilia Zuckerman came into the castle kitchen. When he saw that poor Seppel was still peeling potatoes, he began to scold him. He raged and stormed so furiously that Seppel tumbled off the stool and woke up. He sat on the kitchen floor, rubbing his eyes. He saw that the sun had risen and realised that he had been dreaming. But Zuckerman's fury had not been a dream. That was real enough. The whole enchanted castle was echoing with his roars of rage. The cuckoo in the birdcage had woken up too. It was fluttering about, calling, "Cuckoo! Cuckoo!" until Seppel was deafened. "Shut your beak!" cried Seppel. He went to the kitchen door to listen. What could be wrong? Why was the great magician making all that noise? Suddenly, Petrozilia Zuckerman stopped shouting. For a while, everything was absolutely quiet. Then the voice of the great magician rang out again. He sounded angrier than ever this time, but it lasted only for a moment or so. What can be the matter? Thought Seppel. He turned the doorknob, opened the door, and went out into the hall. There was no one there, no sound to be heard. Wait a minute. A light was shining on the cellar steps. There were voices. Someone was climbing the steps. It was not the great magician Petrozilia Zuckerman. It was Caspar. Seppel shouted for joy and ran to meet Caspar with open arms. Caspar! He was so pleased he could have squashed Caspar flat. Seppel! Cried Caspar. I thought you were in the robber's cave. What are you doing here? Me, said Seppel. I've been peeling potatoes, and I am as happy as a king. But tell me. Suddenly, Seppel caught sight of the fairy Amaryllis. She had followed Caspar up the cellar steps. Seppel's eyes and mouth fell wide open when he saw her. Who's that lady? He asked. She's a fairy lady, said Caspar, the fairy Amaryllis. What a lovely name. It's just right for her. Do you think so? Said the fairy Amaryllis, smiling. But who are you? Him, said Caspar, for Seppel was too amazed to answer. He's my friend Seppel, the best friend in the whole world. I don't know what he's doing here, though. He'll have to tell me himself. Go on, Seppel. However, the fairy Amaryllis interrupted. He can tell you outside, she said. Come out with me. Now that Petrozilia Zuckerman is dead, his castle must not be left standing. What are you going to do? Asked Caspar. Wait and see, said the fairy Amaryllis. She took Caspar by one hand and Seppel by the other. She was going to lead the two friends out of the castle, but Seppel let go of her hand. Wait a minute, he said. I've got to fetch something. He ran to the kitchen and took down the birdcage. What? Said Caspar when Seppel joined them again. A bird? That's right, said Seppel, grinning. It's a cuckoo. Rather a funny sort of cuckoo. Then they both followed the fairy Amaryllis out of the castle gate. Once they were outside, the fairy told them to go a little further away, as far as the wood. She herself stayed behind. When Caspar and Sepple had reached the wood, she turned to the castle and raised her hand. The walls silently crumpled and fell. There was nothing left of Zuckermann's enchanted castle but a heap of broken stones and tiles. The toad's pool was buried beneath the ruins. The fairy Amaryllis made a hedge of thorns grow up around the ruins of the castle. Then she turned her back on the ruin and went up to the two friends. She didn't walk, she floated. The leaves and grass bent as she passed over them. "I have to thank you, Caspar," she said. "You can be sure I shall never forget what you have done for me." She took a thin gold ring from her finger. "Take this ring and keep it safe," she said. "It is a wishing ring. It will give you 3 wishes. Whatever they are, if you say them aloud and turn the ring on your finger, they will be granted. Now, give me your hand, Caspar." Caspar let the fairy Amaryllis put the ring on his finger. "Thank you," he said. But the fairy Amaryllis said that she was the one who should be thanking him. "Now I am going home to fairyland," she said. "Goodbye, both of you. Good luck and a safe return home. I wish you health and happiness and merry hearts, today, tomorrow, and always." With these words, she floated away. Caspar and Sepple waved their handkerchiefs. As she flew, she began to look thin and transparent, until at last she faded away altogether and vanished out of sight. And next time we'll have to find out what happens to Caspar and Sepple and the cuckoo, who we know is the Robber Hotzenplotz. See you next time. Bye!